Thanksgiving dinner was already halfway through when Vanessa stood and tapped her glass with the back of her fork. The sound cut clean through the room. Conversations stalled. Plates paused midair. "We're doing a little reset tonight," she announced, smiling, as if she were unveiling a surprise everyone had agreed to. Nothing dramatic, just structure. Michael shifted beside her. He didn't look at me. Vanessa's eyes moved around the table, confident, practiced. Phones off the table. "Kids eat first, gifts later, and going forward, I'll be handling the logistics." A few nods followed. Someone chuckled. A cousin murmured, "Probably for the best." I reached for my card when the serving tray came back around. The reader beeped once, then again. Declined. Vanessa leaned over before I could move. She took the device from my hand and turned it so everyone could see the screen. "It's fine." I paused the cards earlier. The room tilted toward her. For everyone's benefit, she added soft and reassuring. "We've been a little loose lately. This keeps things responsible." A laugh broke out near the end of the table. Another joined it. Then applause. Not loud, polite. Supportive. I looked at Michael. His jaw tightened. He focused on his plate. Vanessa rested a hand on his shoulder. "We talked about this," she reminded him, still smiling. He nodded once. Someone raised their glass. To family teamwork. More clapping. Chairs scraped as people adjusted, already moving in rhythm with her voice. Vanessa reached for the serving dish in front of me and slid it down the table. "Let's keep portions lighter. Doctor's orders," she said. Not to me, not to anyone in particular. Just a rule placed where my hands had been. I folded my napkin slowly. The sound of fabric against fabric felt louder than the applause. Vanessa turned toward me, then eyes warm, rehearsed concern. "You understand." I did not answer. I watched the way the room leaned away from me and toward her, the way my silence made space for her certainty. She sat satisfied. The clapping faded. Conversation restarted, softer, careful. I lifted my glass and smiled across the table at my son. Not because I agreed, because I had made a decision. The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction created by the Her Shadow Channel team, based on real-life situations to convey lessons about family emotions and human values. All characters and events are illustrative. Vanessa hadn't arrived like a storm. She arrived quietly smiling, carrying dessert she hadn't been asked to bring, and compliments she delivered with precision. "This smells incredible," she used to say, already stepping into my kitchen. "I don't know how you keep everything so organized." Michael would glance at me relieved. He liked that she noticed things. He liked that she sounded grateful. At first, her help came wrapped in courtesy. She offered to make the grocery list. She suggested a different brand of coffee because it was easier on Michael's stomach. She rearranged the pantry one afternoon and apologized before I could comment. "I hope that's okay. I just thought it might be simpler this way." I told her it was fine. I told myself it didn't matter. Soon the language shifted. It stopped being about what I did and became what we should do. We should host earlier next year. We might want to simplify holidays. We talked about budgeting. Each sentence slid past me without resistance because none of them sounded aggressive. They sounded cooperative, reasonable. Michael never corrected her. When I hesitated, he smoothed it over with a shrug and a quiet reassurance. "She's just trying to help," his tone implied, even when his mouth didn't say it out loud. Once, when she answered a question meant for me, I laughed it off. Another time, she canceled a repair appointment I had scheduled and replaced it with her own contractor. "It'll save you the trouble," she explained, already moving on. I felt irritation rise, then settle. Letting it go felt easier than interrupting the flow of things, easier than explaining why it bothered me, easier than risking tension Michael clearly didn't want to manage. Vanessa noticed that. She noticed what went unanswered. She noticed what I didn't reclaim. Peace became my excuse. Harmony, my justification. The more I stepped back, the more confidently she stepped forward. She began speaking on my behalf without checking first. Guests listened. Michael adapted. The house adjusted. And I told myself this was what compromise looked like. I didn't see the cost at the time. I only knew that saying nothing kept the room calm, and calm felt like success. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, she wasn't guessing anymore. She knew exactly how far she could go. There were moments when I felt the words rise sharp and ready only to swallow them back down. Once, when Vanessa corrected me in front of my sister about a recipe I had been making the same way for decades, the table went still. I laughed lightly, as if it were nothing. Vanessa smiled wider. Later that night, she found me alone in the kitchen. Her voice softened concern carefully measured. I hope that didn't come across wrong. I was just trying to keep things consistent. I nodded. The apology sounded sincere enough. Michael hovered nearby, relieved the tension had passed. Another time I mentioned a repair I had scheduled. Vanessa interrupted, already scrolling on her phone. That's been handled. We're going with someone else. It's easier. The word we landed again. Michael shifted in his chair, then looked at me with a warning in his eyes before I could respond. Let's not make it awkward, he murmured, barely audible. It's not a big deal. So I let it go, again. Each correction came with a small apology later. Each apology came with reassurance that she meant well, and each time I wondered if I was being overly sensitive, if my discomfort was the real problem. I told myself families required flexibility, that harmony meant choosing the right moment, that speaking up over small things made you look difficult. Vanessa grew bolder as my hesitation became predictable. She answered questions before I could. She finalized plans without looping me in. She spoke with confidence that suggested permission had already been granted. Michael kept smoothing the edges, filling silences before they turned into conflict. His loyalty leaned toward the quietest outcome, not the fairest one. I absorbed the blame without realizing it. If something felt wrong, it must be because I was holding on too tightly. If I felt dismissed, it was because I hadn't adapted quickly enough. Silence became my contribution to peace. And in that quiet, Vanessa learned exactly how much room she had. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, she wasn't testing boundaries. She was using the ones I had already erased. The more I replayed the night in my head, the clearer it became that nothing about it had been improvised. Vanessa didn't seize control at Thanksgiving. She arrived already holding it. Weeks earlier, she had started using the language of hosts. Not guests, not helpers, hosts. We'll need a tighter schedule this year, she'd said during a phone call, flipping pages I couldn't see. Thanksgiving runs better when there's structure. I remembered standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to her outline arrival times and seating plans as if she were reading from a script. It'll take the pressure off you, she added quickly. You've done enough over the years. Michael had been in the room then. He didn't interrupt. He nodded along, eyes on his screen. A few days later, she brought up finances, casual and careful. Not a demand, a suggestion. We should simplify spending, she said, sliding her phone across the table toward Michael. Just so nothing gets out of hand during the holidays. He hesitated. She filled the pause smoothly. I'll only manage the essentials. Groceries, utilities. It's temporary. Temporary sounded harmless. Convenient. Michael agreed before I had time to process what was being offered. I'll take care of it, she promised, already tapping through menus. From that moment on, things shifted quietly. She asked where guests usually sat, then started assigning places. She talked about keeping phones away from the table to keep everyone present. She spoke about traditions as if they were flexible suggestions, not habits built over decades. Each decision was small enough to seem reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. At dinner, when she announced the reset, no one looked surprised. They adjusted easily, like people following instructions they had already accepted. Michael didn't question her because he'd already agreed to parts of it. The authority didn't come from her voice that night. It came from weeks of preparation he hadn't shared with me. I sat there listening to rules being enforced in my own home and understood the truth I had avoided. Thanksgiving wasn't the beginning. It was the reveal. Vanessa didn't raise her voice when she decided where I would sit. She didn't need to. She rested her hand on the back of my chair and smiled toward the children. "Let's move Eleanor closer to them. It'll make things easier for whom went unspoken." Before I could respond, my chair was already sliding. Someone stood to help. Another reached for my plate to keep it from tipping. The movement happened around me, efficient and practiced. I found myself nearer to the end of the table, boxed in by high chairs and small elbows. Vanessa stepped smoothly into the space I'd vacated. The head of the table fit her easily. She adjusted her napkin, straightened the serving dishes, and gave a small nod, as if confirming an arrangement that had already been approved. Phones away, she reminded everyone, her tone gentle but firm. Hands moved. Screens disappeared. No one looked at me. Aunt Lorraine hesitated for half a second, then followed along. My sister caught my eye, then dropped it. The children waited for Vanessa's signal before reaching for food. Michael cleared his throat and lifted his glass. "Let's keep things simple tonight." Vanessa smiled at him approval, passing silently between them. The food was passed from her side of the table now. Portions were decided before they reached me. She corrected a child's posture, redirected a conversation, answered a question about holiday plans that had been directed my way. I listened as my own house responded to her voice. When someone asked about next year's gathering, Vanessa didn't glance in my direction. "We'll see what works best," she said lightly. Consistency helps everyone. No one disagreed. I sat where I had been placed, hands folded, watching the flow of authority settle. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't aggressive. It was accepted. That was when the truth finally settled in. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't enthusiasm. It wasn't miscommunication. It was control. And everyone at the table knew exactly who was in charge. The urge came the way it always did. Fast, familiar, almost comforting. Explain. Clarify. Smooth the edges before anyone noticed the tension. I felt it in my chest as Vanessa redirected another conversation as Michael nodded along without looking at me. The reflex told me to step in gently to make it easier for everyone else. "I can take care of that," I almost offered when she began outlining plans for December. The words hovered practiced and ready. I had used them before. Every time something slipped from my hands, I reached for reason. Every time a decision passed me by, I dressed my objection in softness. Once, when she canceled a payment I had already approved, I explained my budgeting process as if it needed defending. She listened politely, then thanked me for sharing, and did exactly what she'd planned anyway. Another time when Michael brushed off a concern with a tired smile. I laid out my intentions carefully, hoping clarity would restore balance. It didn't. It turned the moment into a discussion I could lose. I learned that explaining never stopped the outcome. It only delayed it. Across the table, Vanessa leaned closer to Michael, lowering her voice just enough to signal importance. He listened. He always did when she sounded certain. I watched the pattern unfold again. Authority asserted. Silence rewarded. Reason offered only when it could be ignored. The instinct to justify tightened its grip. I pressed my thumb into my palm beneath the table and waited it out. Explaining invited debate. Debate implied uncertainty. Uncertainty handed control to whoever spoke last. I had mistaken patience for strategy. I had confused accommodation with strength. The realization settled quietly. I didn't need agreement. I didn't need approval. And I didn't need to be understood to be right. Across from me, Vanessa laughed at something Michael said, already confident the evening was moving the way she intended. I folded my napkin, once then again steadying my hands. For the first time in years, I let the urge to soften pass without acting on it. I wasn't preparing an argument. I was choosing clarity. Vanessa was in the middle of explaining how December would work when I lifted my hand. Not high, not dramatic, just enough to stop the rhythm she'd set for the room. Her sentence trailed off. Conversations thinned. The pause felt unfamiliar, like a piece of furniture moved an inch out of place. She turned toward me with the same practiced smile. The one that suggested patience, accommodation. I didn't look at her. I looked at my son. Michael's eyes flickered with confusion, then something closer to warning. He shifted in his chair, ready to fill the space for me the way he always had. I didn't let him. I placed my napkin on the table and rested my hands beside it. The clink of silverware slowed. Someone at the far end stopped chewing. "This house is in my name." The words landed clean. No apology, no explanation. Vanessa's smile held for half a second too long. Her fork froze midair. Michael blinked once, then again. I stayed where I was. Let the quiet stretch. Let the sentence stand on its own. "And the cards you paused," I added, turning slightly so the room could hear, "are linked to my account. There is no shared access. There never was." A chair shifted. Someone cleared their throat. The hum of the refrigerator sounded suddenly loud. Vanessa laughed, sharp and quick. It didn't reach her eyes. "That's not what this is about." I met her gaze then. Calm, steady. "It is." Michael's face drained. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His attention moved between us, the ground he'd been standing on slipping away. Vanessa tried again, softer this time. We agreed. There was no agreement, I said evenly. The word no settled where her confidence had been. She sat back, adjusting her posture, as if control might return with composure. It didn't. The room no longer leaned toward her. Conversations didn't restart. No one waited for her cue. Authority doesn't argue when it's real. It simply exists. Vanessa lowered her eyes to her plate. Michael stared at the table. I picked up my glass and took a sip, my hands steady. The power she'd carried all evening was gone, not because I raised my voice, but because I hadn't needed to. Vanessa tried to recover with a laugh that arrived too quickly and stayed too long. It hung in the air, waiting for someone to join it. No one did. She reached for her glass, then set it down untouched. Her shoulders straightened, posture recalibrating, as if confidence could be rebuilt by alignment alone. "Well," she said lightly, smoothing the edge of her napkin, "that doesn't change the plan for tonight." Silence answered her. Aunt Lorraine focused on her plate as though it required study. My sister adjusted her chair, the scrape of wood loud in the pause. A cousin stood to refill a drink no one had asked for. Michael finally looked at me. The confusion in his face sharpened into something heavier. He leaned toward Vanessa, his voice low but strained. "You told me this was settled." Her jaw tightened. She didn't look at him. "We talked about it." "That's not the same thing," he said louder than he meant to. She turned, then irritation flashing before she caught it. "This isn't the time." The room heard it anyway. Michael's hands dropped to the table. His shoulders sagged, the certainty he'd carried all evening slipping away. He stared at the space between his fingers, as if the truth had landed there, and he wasn't ready to touch it. I didn't step in. I didn't explain. I didn't soften the moment for him the way I used to. Vanessa waited for someone to rescue the rhythm. No one did. The authority she'd worn so easily began to feel heavy on her frame. Without the room responding, her words lost momentum. She picked at her food, then pushed the plate aside. Conversations restarted in fragments, careful and distant. Plans were no longer announced. They were avoided. Michael rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up again, his eyes held understanding instead of defense. I met his gaze briefly, then looked away. I had said what needed to be said. Everything else belonged to the silence. Michael found me in the kitchen after the guests had gone. He stood in the doorway for a moment, hands empty, as if unsure what to do with them. "I thought you'd agreed," he said finally. The words came out rough, stripped of the certainty he'd worn all evening. "She told me you were comfortable with it." "With all of it." I kept my attention on the counter, aligning the plates I hadn't yet put away. "I didn't agree," I said. "I didn't object out loud. Those are not the same thing." He stepped closer, then stopped. "You never said no. I never said yes." The distinction landed between us, heavy and unavoidable. He rubbed the back of his neck the way he used to when he was younger, and knew he'd misjudged something. "She made it sound settled," he said. "Like you'd decided to step back." I turned, then meeting his eyes without softening my expression. "Deciding for someone is not the same as deciding with them." He nodded slowly. The movement was small, but it carried weight. "I should have asked." "Yes," I said. "You should have." There was no anger in my voice. Just fact. He swallowed. "What happens now?" I didn't rush the answer. "Nothing dramatic," I said. "But things will be clear." I told him what would change. Decisions in my home would involve me. Finances tied to my accounts would stay that way. Holidays would be discussed, not announced. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded again. This time the gesture looked different, less defensive, more deliberate. "I understand," he said quietly. I believed him, not because he sounded remorseful, but because he didn't argue. He hesitated at the door before leaving. "I didn't realize how much you'd been carrying." "I know," I said. When he walked away, I returned to the dishes. My hands moved steadily. Nothing had been repaired. Nothing had been punished. But something essential had shifted into place. Thanksgiving didn't end with slammed doors or raised voices. It ended the way truth usually does, without ceremony. The days that followed were calm in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Not cheerful, not warm, just steady. Michael called once, then again. His voice carried a new carefulness, as if he were learning where the edges were. "I'll check with you before we plan anything," he said during one of those calls. "That would be appropriate," I replied. He didn't argue. Vanessa stayed silent. No apology arrived. No explanation followed. I hadn't expected either. Accountability doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up as restraint. When they visited again, she didn't rearrange the room. She waited to be offered a seat. When conversation drifted toward decisions, she paused and looked at me instead of speaking over me. I didn't reward the shift with praise. I didn't punish the past with reminders. I simply occupied the space that had always been mine. At one point, Michael hesitated near the doorway, uncertain. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. And this time it wasn't reassurance. It was fact. I realized then how much energy I had spent confusing silence with kindness. How often I had stepped aside and called it love. How many moments I had softened myself to keep the room comfortable for everyone else. Clarity felt different. It didn't demand attention. It didn't require agreement. It held. I didn't need to repeat what I had said at the table. One sentence had been enough because it was true. Truth doesn't weaken with time. It settles. If you're listening to this because something in it feels familiar, I want you to hear this plainly. You don't need to be loud to be respected. You don't need to explain what already belongs to you. And you don't need to disappear to keep the peace. Silence can look like grace, but clarity is what keeps you whole. That quiet I found after Thanksgiving wasn't empty, it was mine.